To this day, the original Sonic games for the Genesis are some of the best platforms out there, or at least two of them are, so it's no wonder why Sega would port them to other platforms, and again, and again, and again. The first three Sonic games are some of the most accessible games out there, though the re-releases and collections with them are usually just emulations. But in 2022, we got a collection with the first four games fully remade. People absolutely hate this collection. Sonic Origins had plenty of stuff going for it, like animated cutscenes and having the mobile remakes, along with S3K being completely remastered. On the other hand, it only had 4 games, was notoriously buggy at launch, had a fake classic mode, and an overall lack of features in comparison to other collections. Personally, I feel like the level of hate this collection receives is a bit much, but I can see where it's coming from. After it came out, pretty much everyone forgot it existed for a few months until the end of March this year when it was announced that Sonic Origins would be getting a DLC. This wasn't a massive surprise, its existence had leaked a few days before, and people had been speculating about it for a few months. Some of the things that people thought would be included, though, were pretty insane, like Sonic R, a playable classic Shadow. Some people thought the Chaotix would be included, with all the characters from it playable in the classics, but by far the thing that most people speculated on was Amy and Metal Sonic being playable characters. This DLC had a lot of potential, and what we got it was pretty good. Easily the most exciting aspect was Amy being playable, but we also saw that all the Game Gears were going to be in them too. I know a lot of people were pretty indifferent to this, but I've always found those games really interesting. And to top it off, similar to Mania, it was getting a physical release. I made a video talking about this when the trailer was released, and I was definitely excited. And after a few months, the DLC is finally here, so let's see if it's the definitive Sonic collection, or just kinda trash. First issue right out of the box, the whole game isn't right out of the box. Origins is on the disc, but you still have to download the DLC, which is beyond stupid. There isn't an excuse for this, there's no way that both wouldn't fit on a disc or cartridge. I know that this is ultimately not a huge deal, but looking at it from a preservation standpoint, it is a flaw that should be addressed. If you're making a physical version, you might as well go all the way with it. Moving past that, let's take a look at the new playable character, Amy. Actually no, let's first address Knuckles and Sonic CD, because we might as well get all the negatives out of the way. Knuckles plays fine here. Sonic CD is very heavy on exploration, so his playstyle fits, even if I don't like Sonic CD that much. The problem is that he should have been here in the first place. I promise I do like this collection, but how do you excuse this? All 4 games were given all 3 playable characters in base Origins, except Knuckles being excluded in CD. Why? To act like this is a big selling point to the DLC is kind of annoying, but let's move on to something genuinely exciting. That being, Amy as a playable character. When the trailer was released, Amy being revealed was one thing that got people really excited. After all, it was a whole new way to play these old games. On top of that, Amy is generally a pretty underutilized character, and it was interesting to think about what her moveset might be. I opted to play as her through the first part of S3K, and she was alright. The big move here is the hammer spin, which is basically a better insta-shield. As long as you're in the air, you can use it indefinitely. While this is pretty simple and does kind of make the game easier, I still think it's a fun way to try out the old games with this new spin on it. Plus, the insta-shield is really underrated. Also notable is the fact that Amy does in fact have a super form. It's pretty much just her but glowing, but still, that's something. Again, it's simply nice to see her as a playable character, especially considering she's going to be playable in the Superstars and probably Frontiers too. Although that's the most notable part of the DLC, there was another thing that caught my attention with the trailer release. That being the inclusion of all 12 Sonic Game Gear games. On the off chance you've seen my previous videos, you know that I'm a pretty big apologist towards these. It was nice seeing them get some attention, and I was excited to see what was done with them. But again, let's get the negatives out of the way first. The first issue I have here isn't really a negative so much as just kind of being weird. That being the inclusion of Mean Bean Machine and Spinball. Just the Game Gear versions though. Again, this just kind of confuses me. There really wasn't a reason to exclude the Genesis versions, but they did anyway. It just seems kind of pointless. The second issue is a bit bigger. If you're watching this, it's almost guaranteed you know about the Master System versions of these games, but you're almost completely identical in every way to the Game Gear games, except with less screen crunch. The lack of these versions is kind of stupid. It's like if in Sonic Mega Collection we got the GBA remake of Sonic 1 instead of the original. I see no reason to not have the definitive versions of these games, but then again, they're not the only one who have done this. Moving on from that, the actual emulation quality is pretty good all things considered. I played a few of the different games, and they all played pretty well. They didn't run into frame rate problems or anything like that. I personally find the idea of all 12 games being remastered like the rest of Origins to be a bit unrealistic, so I'm fine with emulations. I will say I'm a bit disappointed we didn't get animated cutscenes for any of them though. Another neat inclusion is the fact that there's now multiplayer in the Sonic Drift games, which is a nice inclusion. Personally, I'm just glad that these 12 games are just easily accessible and in collection on modern consoles. All in all, Sonic Origins Plus is a really good package. Just the inclusion of a new character to play as makes it worth experiencing, along with having several other things, but is that really enough to call it definitive? Well, it's hard to say. Personally, I feel like the stuff that Sonic Jam adds are more interesting, but then again, that's really not widespread, and it's pretty hard to get your hands on it nowadays. If you want to play the classic Sonic games without having a Genesis, I feel like your best bet would be Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection for PS3 to 360. But if you don't have those, Origins Plus is definitely worth playing, even if it's a bit pricey. Or you could always just emulate them, that's an option too.